Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Julie Brines. I am a faculty and residence-elect for the Commission today, and on behalf of the International Colloquium Planning Team and the CGDSD Directorate Board, I'd like to welcome you to our fourth session of the 2025 International Colloquium. This year, we are proud to present a series of 4 webinars as part of the Colloquium. Before we get started, I wanted to share that here at ACPA, we are invested in the idea of equity, and I would like to share our equity and inclusion statement with you. Please take some time to read and understand ACPA's commitment to equity and inclusion. And we'll just take just a moment. The colloquium will explore critical issues in higher education internationalization, focus on international students' education, well-being, and social justice in global contexts. Submissions may address themes such as mentoring, international professionals, transnational pedagogy, graduate student support, career pathways, transitions, social justice, immigration, and redefining international students. We're also excited to share that our commission is actively recruiting new directorate board members. Involvement in the directorate provides the opportunity for ongoing engagement with colleagues with a shared interest in international education and cross-cultural learning. We have up to 10 open positions. The application deadline is 11:59 p.m. Central Time on April 30th. The application and info session related information can be found on our link tree, and we'll also be sharing this information in our chat as well. Please go ahead and put a little bit of information about yourself in the chat box, if you can do that. This will also be listed in the chat box so that you can see what you need to do. We'd love to know who's here participating. Today's presentation is titled, "Oh, Canada, Fallout from 2024 Changes to International Student Enrollment and Immigration Policies," presented by Dan Cantiller. I would like to welcome Angelina Ruiz and Nazafrin Esfandaria, who are joining us on the panel. Angelina is a graduate program administrator at York University, and Nazafrin is a student in the Master of Science program at the University of British Columbia. So just a little bit of information about Dan. Dan, who uses he, him pronouns, has worked in Canadian post-secondary student affairs for 15 years at universities in Ontario and British Columbia. With previous experience in housing and residence life, learning and transition support, academic advising, and program accreditation, Dan currently works at the Toronto Metropolitan University as an on-campus engagement officer at the Registrar's Office. In this role, Dan works with TMU's National Student Recruitment Team, focusing on strategic enrollment management and advising prospective students, their families, and school counselors. He was formerly a director at large with the Canadian Association of College and University Student Services and vice president of Forte Toronto Gay Men's Chorus. At TMU, Dan is co-chair of the Positive Space Faculty and Staff Network and supports the steering committee of the Asian Faculty and Staff Network. Just a little bit of information about the presentation today. Since early 2024, Canada has gone from a top destination for post-secondary international students to one that is increasingly seen as unwelcoming. IRCC policy changes and other challenges mirror the direction taken by other top host countries, such as the United States, the UK, and Australia. With increased interest for international students to explore other study options, how will the future of international student mobility and hence student development and student affairs be impacted by these shifts? And that's what Dan and the panelists are going to talk about today. So I'd like to invite the presenters to share their screen and start their presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. All right. Are folks able to see the title slide? Perfect. Awesome. Thank you again so much, Julie, for that introduction. And we'll get started. So as Julie mentioned, my name is Dan Cantiller, and I'm a campus engagement officer in student recruitment at Toronto Metropolitan University. A little bit more about myself, although you've heard a lot already. I was born in Indiana, and my family immigrated to Toronto, where I grew up. Identify as a cis gay Filipino man, and I have been working in Canadian higher education for several years. I'm very grateful to call Toronto home. In terms of land acknowledgement, so Takaranto or Toronto means the place in the water where the trees are standing, and it has been a meeting place of several Indigenous nations since time immemorial. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and is also located in the Dish with One Spoon territory of the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee. We are all settlers and newcomers called to peaceably share and steward the lands, waters, animal, and plant life of this territory. And Toronto will be the location for the ACPA 2027 convention. So just briefly what will be covered in the session. So we will be discussing the 2024 policy changes by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, or IRCC, and the impact that that has had on international students currently in Canada, as well as prospective international students. We'll discuss how Canadian post-secondary institutions have adapted their strategies with regards to retaining international student enrollment and persistence. And we'll also discuss future trends and international student markets as they relate to Canada, the United States, and other international host countries. All right. So just some context with regards to international students and immigration in Canada. So for 2024 was a huge shift in what has been official policy in Canada for at least the past 10 years. There had previously been a very welcoming environment for immigration, including international students to Canada. And this was helping to address the reality of an aging Canadian population, as well as labor shortages, including in healthcare, trades such as construction, and other need areas to ensure a secure Canadian economic future. There's also been a drop in domestic enrollment in post-secondary education. And international students are actually considered a source of highly skilled immigrants. So given that they would have studied and also gained work experience domestically. Unfortunately, as well, there's been chronic underfunding of the education system within Canada. Education is kind of managed at the provincial or territory level, but as well in terms of support and oversight from the federal government. So previously, there has been a strong policy for a pathway towards permanent residency and immigration for international students. We have had a points-based immigration system in Canada since the 1960s. And under these federal policies, it was easier for international students to qualify for permanent residency, to be able to remain in Canada post their program, post-graduation. After 3 years of permanent residency, there would be a pathway to apply for Canadian citizenship. So just in terms of providing an idea of sort of the number of international students and the growth that we had experienced in Canadian post-secondary, by the end of 2023, we had more than 1 million international students studying in Canada. And this was a tripling of the number of international students that we had in 2013. So this was a huge increase in the number of international students studying in Canada, and with many pursuing programs of interest and also pathways to explore settlement and a life in Canada and planning their careers. So as is the focus for this presentation, there were several policy changes through the IRCC last year. Just briefly in terms of a visual, this is a timeline of different impacts and changes that occurred. So in January 1st, 2024, the required cost of living amount for incoming international students was doubled. So previously it had been about $10,000 that incoming international students had to prove that they would be able to fund their living in Canada, and the government doubled that minimum required amount in terms of proof for incoming international students. On January 22nd, the IRCC announced that there would be a cap on international student study permits for a 2-year period. And in 2024, the goal would be to reduce the number of study permits from the previous year by 35%, which is a huge amount, and caused a lot of concern for folks. In March of 2024, it was also announced that there was a plan to reduce the number of temporary residents in Canada over the next 2 years. And by March 31st, the provinces and territories had to implement what is a process for what is now called provincial attestation letters. So this is how study permits would be allocated across the country, across the provinces and territories, and then provinces and territories would allocate the number of spots for international students to the specific institutions within the province. Later in the year, there were further changes in the fall. So September 1st, in an effort or addressing criticism of colleges that had public-private partnerships to deliver their programs, it was determined that students who were starting a program in such a college would not be eligible for a postgraduate work permit, which was a strong attracting factor for many students entering our college institutions. In September 18th, it was also announced that there was a further intention to reduce the number of international study permits that would be distributed by the government by a further 10% from the levels of 2024. And in October, we saw another announcement of a reduction intention to reduce the number of permanent residents for 3 years. So really kind of a pulling back from what was traditionally a very welcoming destination in terms of Canada as a nation for international students or for folks to settle. We saw a lot of tightening through these policy changes with regards to the prospects for folks who would want to arrive. In November, it was also announced that those who would be studying for postgraduate work permits would now have to also demonstrate a score in their Canadian language benchmark. And post 2024, earlier this year, in January, further restriction that open work permits that were allowed for spouses or partners for international students would be restricted to those who were in master's programs of at least 16 months in length, or in doctoral programs, or select other programs such as in healthcare. So this is a summary of some of those changes that we experienced in 2024. So again, a 35% decrease in international study permits compared to 2023, and then an announcement of a further 10% decrease expected. A lot of the reasoning that was provided by the government with regards to the shift in immigration policy was lack of available housing, interrogation of the quality of college programs, especially those using international recruiters, particularly into our college system, as well as private institutions, and a criticism that folks were abusing the system in terms of arriving to Canada as international students, and then a strain on other social systems that we have within the country. There's also criticism that many of the programs that international students were enrolling in were not actually meeting our workforce needs within the country. For example, many of our international students would be enrolling in business programs, but then there wouldn't be work opportunities for them post-graduation. And I did mention in the previous slide about the provincial attestation letters, changes to eligibility for postgraduate work permits, as well as open work permits for spouses for international students. Okay, so this is a summary of some of the impacts that we've seen from these policy changes. So this has caused a lot of anxiety and uncertainty for our current international students in the country, and for those who are supporting them. Unfortunately, in terms of the public discourse or what politicians have been sort of saying in the news, has had the effect of scapegoating international students and newcomers for a lot of social problems that we experience. So whether that is lack of adequate and affordable housing, if that is a strain on our healthcare system, or accusations of abuse of claiming asylum in the country. Unfortunately, we've also seen an associated increase in hate crimes, especially targeting the South Asian community, as India and China are our top sender countries with regards to welcoming international students to Canada. Amid all the confusion and the changing policies, we've seen a rapid decline in new international student applications and enrollments. And oftentimes with the stated caps, with the provincial attestation letters, the impact of actual applications and enrollments has fallen well below those targets. So it's had all of these policy changes have had a chilling effect with regards to interest and enrollment of international students in Canada. A direct impact that we have seen in our institutions and that have also been widely reported in the news is that the financial situation for our institutions is not improved and it's getting worse. We've seen a reduction in program offerings and suspension of admission to certain programs and even program closures. Notably, in Ontario, where we have about 40% of all post-secondary institutions in Canada, many of our colleges have had to suspend or close programs, but also we're starting to see announcements for program closures in the university sector as well. There have been hundreds of staff and instructor layoffs, and including folks who are in student affairs functions or that are supporting students in kind of equity-focused offices or in student affairs functions as well. And we have started to see the closure of some satellite campuses. Some analysts in terms of Canadian higher education landscape have predicted that they expect about 1,000 total programs to close. Unfortunately, this will have an impact, especially on those on students who are in more remote locations in terms of reduced offerings. And the kinds of programs that have been cut also are providing less choice for study for both domestic and international students. And all this has had a really damaging impact on the reputation of Canada as a positive and welcoming destination for international students and for immigration. All right, I'll ask that we pause the recording. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. So on this world map, you can see with the black location markers, these are what are considered the top four kind of like host countries for international students. So Canada, the US, the UK, and Australia. There are the other kind of red location markers are indicating other emerging host countries. And not to say that there aren't any host, nations or institutions in the continent of South America or Africa, for example. But these ones in my reading were kind of emerging as markets of interest in terms of their development. In terms of the context and what we've talked about, mostly about Canada, but there has also been decreases in intake of international students among the top four. So US, UK, Canada, and Australia, which accounts for more than 50% of where students, international students would select to study. Interestingly, we're also seeing an increased number and quality of post-secondary institutions within traditional sender countries. So especially China and India, especially China, there have been improvements in global rankings of their universities, and as in combination with growing geopolitical tensions and relations between some some North American countries like Canada and the US and China and India, this might encourage more students to consider remaining in their country or looking outside of the traditional Big Four. Some other growing markets that I noted on the previous map are included here. And they're located in Europe and Asia. Within Europe, Ireland, they have set a target of increasing their number of international students by 10% within the next couple of years. And they've been especially focusing their recruitment on South Asia and the continent of Africa. We've also seen a growing number of institutions welcoming more international students to German universities. Turkey is uniquely kind of positioned, kind of bridging between Europe and Asia in the Middle East, and has been drawing a lot of international students from the Middle East and like the Arabian Peninsula, as well as the continent of Africa. And then South Korea and Malaysia have been drawing a lot more international students from East Asia, China in particular, and these are becoming attractive locations or destinations for international students considering studying out of country. All right. So how do we support and retain international students? So this is a bit of a recap, but really kind of talking about what we had mentioned throughout the presentation and in the panel. Is clear communication from both governments and institutions is very important. We realize, especially with the rate that there have been announcements or changes that staff that are supporting international students may not have all the answers or processes or policies, and the nuances of those are being worked out. And this has greatly impacted students' abilities to plan and kind of like really shaken a sense of stability with regards to what they're working towards or their future to be able to remain in country. So I think it's really important moving forward. And, if I could have the ear of whoever will be elected the leader for Canada in next week would be understanding like if this is the trend that will continue with regards to a constriction with regards to how we have had our immigration kind of policies in the past, any kind of indication that will help predict what these intakes or caps might look like, so people can kind of navigate through the system and have transparency about those pathways and the ability to kind of plan for their families and their careers. Nazafarine mentioned in some of her answers before, but in terms of work opportunities are limited, and so award and work opportunities are limited for international students, and this misconception that all international students perhaps are extremely wealthy, and that's why they're pursuing studying out of beyond their home country. That's increasingly becoming challenging for international students who may have to work increased hours while also studying to be able to afford their increased tuition rates for international students. And an increased cost of living and financial requirements to study in Canada. Very important as well to have mental health supports that understand the situation for international students and appropriate referrals both within the institution and in the broader community. As was mentioned, an unfortunate perception with a lot of these policy changes and what's been discussed by politicians and in the news is that there has been a scapegoating of international students as well as newcomers. So it's very important to speak out against ignorance and hate, and to be allies, visible allies to these communities and trying to help them, support them moving through their education and possible settlement. These last two issues as well is a call for transparency and ethical international student recruitment practices. That was a criticism that has been given as a reason for the need to reduce the number of international students, as well as quality assurance for designated learning institutions. So we've seen, again, as I mentioned before, our college system and private colleges have really taken a hit and have been accused of effectively being diploma mills or a cover for folks who may not be interested in pursuing programs and leading to meaningful work in Canada. So very quickly, and this is the last slide before I hand it back to Julie. So despite everything that we've said, Canada is still an attractive destination for international student studies as well as immigration. Not just because I'm a fan of Canada, but it does have a reputation of being a safe country and relative stability. Uh, Without getting into specifics, we've been seen as a peaceful country. I hope that will continue despite the challenges that we're experiencing. It is regarded as having a high quality education system, despite us not maybe appropriately funding that said system. But also, even for international students, tuition is relatively affordable compared to other study destinations and costs of living. And overall, Canadian society is generally viewed as tolerant and non-discriminatory. So this may be a desirable place for folks wanting to study or to potentially to plant roots. And many international students and communities already have existing family and community connections that have been well established in Canada over several years. So it's also an attractive destination for that reason. But yeah, these are some of the sources from things that we pulled from the presentation. And thank you for joining us, but I'll pass it back over to Julie.
Thank you, Dan. All right, I'm going to post some information. So I just posted some information about the commission, and I'm going to post information about the certificate. And I'm going to share my screen really quickly so I can show you the QR code in case you'd like to do that. So our time has come to an end. We'd like to take a moment to thank our presenters and our audience for giving us their time and commitment to this work. This was the last of our 4 sessions in our 2025 International Colloquium. Thank you everyone for attending this year. Before you leave, make sure to check on the link, or you can scan this QR code so that you can get your certificate. You have to sign up for that by April 30th to be eligible. And if you have any questions, of course, you can contact the commission. I did post a link to our link tree that has all of the information in there about how you can join the commission or join our directorate. And once again, thank you so much. And we hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you, everybody.